Welcome to the Growth Over Grades podcast, a show connecting you with thought leaders, pioneers, and change agents who are leading the charge to support schools and districts in making the shift toward competency-based education and to promote growth over grades. I'm Jordan Lewis, and on the show today, we have former superintendent and now education consultant, Damian LaCroix. Damian's driven by a personal mission to inspire leaders and teams to unlock their full potential through purpose-driven coaching. With a distinguished career spanning 33 years, he has served students, staff, and families in various capacities, including as a public education teacher, coach, principal, and a 19-year career as superintendent of Howard Swamico School System as superintendent of schools. During this time, his tenure was marked by innovation, compassion, and creativity, earning the district national recognition. Today, we've dived deep into exploring Damian's unique perspectives on education leadership, while we cover important topics on leadership loneliness. Today, we chat about how district leaders can create a support network to help lift them through the challenging times, strategies that can allow leaders to thrive, and the importance of self-care, knowing that being the best version of yourself does have an impact on those you serve, your students. Now to my conversation with Damian LaCroix. Damian, thank you so much for joining us here today on the show. I'm really excited about this topic specifically because I guess there's really two reasons why I'm excited about it. One, I think this topic we're going to really dive into today on leadership and leadership loneliness is not something that's isolated just to the world of education. So I think that's a really critical topic that we're going to be discussing because there's a lot of leaders and a lot of industries that are going to gain value out of this. But I also just think it's something that's not being spoken about enough. And there are isolated hubs that are really preaching these messages, but this is going to be a really great opportunity to bring awareness to something that is impacting a lot of fantastic educators. So I'm really excited to dive in, and thank you so much for spending some time with us here today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Jordan.
So to kind of kick things off here, Damian, knowing a little bit about your background in education, I'm curious about the transition from teaching to education leadership, and what are some of the unexpected lessons that you learned along the way as you started making this transition?
Yeah, well, I'll begin by saying if you're feeling lonely, you're not alone, which is kind of an interesting thought to ponder. In fact, the current Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, has declared an epidemic of loneliness in America right now, and actually wrote a book called Together, which speaks to the power of community and connection. And so as I reflect back in relationship to your question on my educational career, really came from a family of educators, and so felt a calling at a young age. My grandmother was teaching in a one-room schoolhouse back in the 1930s, multi-grade. I had aunts who were teachers, so it just seemed very natural that I would enter into the profession myself back in the 1980s, during a time where there was hundreds and hundreds of applicants per position. So it wasn't the current state where, the pipeline seems dry. There was a lot of competition at that time. But, I had people just like we've all had that we respected and admired at the youngest age. In addition to my grandmother, I remember my elementary principal, Mr. Garfield. I remember my middle school principal, Mr. Bester, and not that I had close contact or in-depth relationships with either one of them, but there was just something about them that I found attractive in terms of just the leadership persona that they had, both at the elementary school and at the middle school. And that reinforced my desire to enter into the profession. So started teaching at a high school in Northeast Wisconsin, coming out of college in 1991, and jumped into a master's program in ed leadership right away. It just seemed like the natural thing to do. And I remember, Jordan, my first grad program course, the professor introduced us to Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that gave me a vision really for what was possible, and especially habit number 6, which talks about synergizing, or this idea that we need to collaborate to achieve greater outcomes. And in other words, 1 + 1 doesn't necessarily need to equal 2. 1 + 1 can equal 3 or 4 or 5. And, the power is in the multiplication of, leaders working together. So something about that book and that stage of my life really set me on a course and gave me a vision for, leading at a higher level and then just being in the right place at the right time. I was really young, only 5 or 6 years into teaching when I was asked to be the assistant principal at the high school I was at. And then within a period of a year, I was asked to step into the principalship halfway through the school year and take charge of a $31 million referendum, which at that time was second largest in state history and included the design and construction of a new high school. So I'm 27 at that time. I'm a new principal. I'm a new dad. And we're, designing and building a new high school back in the 1990s. So a lot going on at that time, but that was the start of the journey.
I'm really curious, as you were talking about starting with that Ed Leadership Master's degree, as a teacher who had taken that degree, what do you think that did to your practice as a teacher with having kind of an underlying methodology around leadership?
Yeah, I think it caused me to go from here in terms of my vision to expanding, giving me a peripheral vision. And I distinctly recall, Jordan, early in my admin coursework, coming back in my classroom, coming back into my school, and just seeing through a different lens, seeing that this was really a system. So often, and this was the case for me, I felt like more of an independent contractor. I came into the school. I was young. I was sharing a classroom, so I was a teacher on a cart. I really didn't have a home base. I remember distinctly one of the first days being there was sharing a classroom with a math teacher, and she approached me politely, but made it clear to me that she wanted me to know that this was really a math classroom. So don't put your stuff on. And so there was some loneliness, even early in my career as I was traveling on a cart, and but through the admin coursework, I began to develop a philosophy and a vision for what I thought was possible, even though it wasn't my reality at that time. I felt kind of lonely and disconnected from my department, and so that was, and that to be true, right? We, in the teaching profession, we have a shortage of teachers, not so much because of a lack of availability as much as because within the first 5 years, new teachers are leaving the profession because they feel disconnected and alone. And unfortunately, that was my reality back in the early 1990s as well. And, I could either stay in, leave the profession, or go into administration and try to make a difference. And that's what I chose to do.
It's really interesting just hearing you talk about that sense of loneliness even early in your career. And I often reflect on my early career as a former teacher as well. And I had the opportunity to teach not only high school music, but elementary school as well. But I personally felt that when I was in the high school environment, that's where a lot of that loneliness kind of came out. And it wasn't until much later where I reflected on it and go, why didn't I pursue that? Somebody who has a background in music education just kind of made a lot of sense. But I felt I was just so isolated because, especially in the high school, you are the music teacher, you stick in your lane, you are in the back corner of the building, and there was no collaboration between other people. You go into the staff room and it's like the math teachers are kind of huddled together, and there wasn't that sense of community or culture that I felt, which I feel is something that probably a lot of new teachers do feel. And I know there are a lot of really great programs that are available for us here in Canada and in Ontario, things like the New Teacher Induction Program, which has new teachers with older mentors so they can kind of work together and get through those early stages. But it's interesting that you felt that, and I'm sure a lot of our teachers are feeling the same way. So I'm kind of curious, as we start breaching into this topic, to just understand from you, like, what exactly, Damian, is kind of this leadership loneliness, and how do you see this differing from typical workplace isolation, or are they very much connected?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I would say let's play a game, fill in the blank, right? It's blank at the top. What's the answer? Well, everybody knows the answer is it's lonely at the top. And why does everybody know the answer to that game? Because it's true in many cases. And so that quote really it's attributable to a number of different people, but I think most notably to former CEO of GE, Jack Welch. And basically he used the phrase to describe the isolating nature of leadership and the pressure that comes with high-ranking leadership positions. And it's not limited to the C-suite. I think it can be true in any profession, but specifically we know, and Dr. Murthy speaks to this, over 50% of CEOs in America right now indicate that it's lonely in their role, Jordan. And when I do messages on this topic, and I've done several, from Boise to Williamsburg and everywhere in between, I've got a poll everywhere instrument in my presentation. And so I survey the audience, and typically my audiences are somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 plus, and 80+% of them, when I ask them to respond to the question or the statement, I have often been lonely in my leadership career. 80% agree or strongly agree with that statement, and quite often it's trending more toward the 90% range. So, I'll read you an email that I got from a superintendent. I gave this message last spring in Green Bay at the Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators, and I never had more feedback on a presentation than I had on this one in loneliness. And this superintendent writes me the following last May 3rd. He said, "I was at last week's WASDA conference and was glad that I stayed to hear you speak. When I read the session description in the conference booklet, I shared it with my wife and told her that it sounded like something I needed to attend. I probably was not the only one in the audience feeling as if you were speaking directly to me. I've been working for X school district for 24 years and served my first 13 years as high school principal, and then transitioned into the administrator role where I'm finishing my 11th year. 24 years is a long time to be in one place, but I wouldn't have asked for it any other way. Unfortunately, throughout the years, I have burned a few bridges, and that tends to wear on the soul. I used to be the guy out eating lunch with the staff and sometimes students, but have drifted to isolation of my office recently. As you alluded to in your presentation, solitude can be beneficial, but not withdrawal and isolation. That is something that struck me, not only in my professional life, but also in my personal life. I'm the youngest of four and the only boy in my family. My dad passed away. I went on to talk about the farm, taking care of an 89-year-old mother. And says, I'll spare you the details, but I wanted to say thank you for one of the best presentations I've heard in quite some time. And so I'm not saying that to impress you or the audience, but to impress upon you the fact that I think many, if not the majority of leaders are struggling with this. And certainly as an executive coach working with several superintendents in several districts, that's been my experience thus far.
And I think, Damian, it's important to call out that when we talk about leaders in this capacity, we're not just talking about the person at the top. That term leader is, I think, worth breaking down a little bit. When I hear the word leader in the context of education, I think obviously you have superintendent at the top, but then you have somebody like a director of curriculum. They are a leader to a team of people. You have principals, assistant principals, they're the leader to a team of people. And as well, you want to have teachers feeling empowered to lead change in their own practice as well. So just curious on sort of your thought on that and that term leader itself and what this means in this context.
Yeah, great point, Jordan. To me, leadership is multifaceted, but if I had to distill it down to one word, I would use the word influence. And we all have influence because we all have a platform. Whether you're a support staff member, right, a front desk receptionist, superintendent, principal, teacher, anything in between. So I love the quote from Mother Teresa, speaking of leaders, right, very different leader, but she says, of all the diseases I have known, loneliness is the worst, which is a dramatic statement for her to make. And so I distinctly recall making the transition from the classroom to an administrative leadership role. And I don't know that I recommend this, but I went from being a teacher, coach, advisor in the same building to becoming the assistant principal in the same building to becoming the principal in the same building. So I had a perspective on areas that needed improvement, and I was young and inexperienced, and was going to take those challenges head on. And I distinctly recall calling a mentor of mine, which is a point of recommendation I'll make later in the questions as we talk about what do we do about it. Mm-hmm. My mentor was a business mentor, and I remember calling her and saying, Mary Lou, I feel like the nature of the relationship has changed between me and my former colleagues, some of whom I regarded as friends. And I'll always remember, Jordan, her comment. She had this dramatic pause, and she said, Damian, I want you to know something. You don't have any friends anymore. She went on to say you need to begin associating. If you're looking for that level of support in terms of people who truly know and understand the issues that you're dealing with, you need to create a network of support with other colleagues in like positions. And that didn't mean that you weren't friendly, right? Certainly we know from Gallup's Q12 survey that teamwork can and should be enhanced in the workplace by having a friend on your team or in your school in this case. But that was really a defining moment for me, and it caused me really to start reflecting on where I was at and how I needed to change as a leader moving forward.
And as we start thinking about this moving forward, you were a leader for a really long time. And Damian, I'm really curious from your experiences, was there some sort of moment in your leadership journey that you felt loneliness or isolated that upon reflection later allowed you to bridge into this topic and say, I need to really speak towards it. I need to bring awareness and support other leaders who are going through this because I had this happen to me?
Yeah, there have been a number, and I think it's interesting that you asked the question about moments, Jordan, because I would always coach my team at the beginning of the year to anticipate and expect 3 to 5 defining moments per school year that we're going to mark them, shape them, influence them, mold them. And typically they show up as bad news. We wouldn't have invited them into the room or into the district, but they always have the ability to make you better or make you bitter as a leader. And the choice is really yours to navigate through those. And that's why having, a professional learning community, right, is such an important asset for a leader at any level. So, there's several I could share. The one that comes to mind was August of 2020. My dad passed away right before the first day of school. It's in the midst of COVID. He had congenital heart disease. His kidneys were shutting down. So we had the blessing, however, of knowing this was coming. He didn't want to go to a nursing home or a hospital for emergency procedure because, if you can recall, at that time, family weren't allowed to be at bedside with many of their loved ones in those situations. So we actually had that discussion as a family, and I was able to be with him at the end. And the thing that he kept saying to me, Jordan, and we had a challenging relationship in some ways, but when I arrived in his final days, he kept repeating over and over again, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming." And, on a personal level, that was very powerful for me. And I'm still processing and reflecting that more than 4 years later. Later that month, in September, another defining moment, we had the first teacher in the state of Wisconsin that died of COVID. I had just given her 15-year service award at our Convocation Inn service a few weeks before that. Her name was Heidi Hustley, and I mentioned her name to honor her because of, she was courageous, and we were able to determine that she didn't contract COVID on site, but she had gone to her mother's funeral, which was a spreader event at the time, and she had some health issues and was vulnerable as a result of that. The next month, we had another defining moment in October where a sophomore student took his life. We were in lockdown at that point, and when I met with his mother after, just to console her, one of the things she told me was that he was concerned about falling behind in his homework. And I don't know if that was the determining factor, but certainly as superintendent, when you hear that there's a certain, a great sorrow, sadness, and loneliness associated with that. We had a workplace safety grievance followed a month later because as we were transitioning back into school, staff weren't feeling safe. And then I had parents in our community who, put a petition together with more than 1,000 signatures, demanding that we, reopen all day, every day on a full-time basis as we headed into January of that year. So the convergence of all of those things and the weight of responsibility in a crisis, worldwide pandemic environment where there weren't, a lot of conflicting answers and thoughts and ideas on the part of many, that was truly defining. And there were moments, especially I remember, getting the call that Heidi had passed in my office by myself, knowing I had to go downstairs and talk to our crisis team, and knowing the ripple effect that would have on our staff and our students and our community. You're all alone in that moment, and you pray, and then you step into it, and you try to lead and guide the best you can under really trying circumstances. So it was several moments, but all kind of semi-related in that season of leadership.
Just wanting to take a moment and thank you for sharing that story with us. I think it helps represent, like you mentioned, Damian, the massive weight that is sitting on the shoulders of these leaders and superintendents, and the daily decisions that have to be made. So I appreciate that story first and foremost. Where I'm really curious, and you may dive into this a little bit later, is as a leader, these defining moments led you to feel isolated. Can you recall something that kind of stood out to say, like, why do you have to handle this alone? And I challenge the question because on the outside of it, I would think to myself, like, wow, all of these defining moments have took place. How, as a collective team, are we going to shape a culture of support to get through this? So what was it that really kind of made you feel like, wow, I'm bearing this weight solely?
Well, there are moments where that's the case. And, in the context of that story, I could elaborate and go deeper on a number of other moments where people stepped in and were supportive. My deputy superintendent, Mark Smith, was a great source of support. I had a teacher from one of our elementary schools wrote me a card, and it sat on next to my computer for months. Basically, the line that I remember from the card, Jordan, is, "I see you. I support you." And I actually took that with me to a number of school board meetings and put it in my binder, as we had dozens, if not hundreds, of people either online or in person coming during the public comment section of some of those meetings, sharing their viewpoints and perspectives and opinions on what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing. So so there were, and I journaled some of those things, which I think is a strategy because I wanted to capture some of those. I had a group of teachers that gave me a care basket that included some books and, some candy. And it seems like a little thing, but it was just those kind gestures on the part of, individuals at all different points on the spectrum that really sustained me and helped me get through it. So while it's true that there are definitely moments, and sometimes they're elongated moments where you feel alone, it's also true that, if you've invested yourself in your team and in the school system and in the community, people rise up and provide the support. So kind of think of it like, the footprints in the poem sand, the guy, look back on his life, and, during the toughest points of his life on the beach, he only saw, one set of footprints. And he said, "God, why did you abandon me during the toughest times of my life?" He said, "I didn't abandon you. I was carrying you." Right. And so I know that's true when it comes to those examples I just shared. I didn't get through it by myself. I do think, however, that the danger zone for leaders is when you think you're leading a one-person parade and you feel like you're looking behind and no one's with you or no one's following you. I never necessarily felt that way because I knew that I had, different support from different people, including my wife and, my kids and my family. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention their support because it's such an important part of the social fabric for leaders to sustain them through trials. But at the end of the day, there are certain decisions that you're accountable for, and you can't say, well, the team made the decision, Jordan.
Right.
And our board, our board of education at the time was super strong and super supportive. And although they were under intense pressure to step in and start making decisions at the board table, they respected the integrity of our governing system, which empowers me with operational decisions. And they never did that. And some of them paid the price for that politically. So I felt their support in a different way. It's not that they were calling me, but they were saying, hey, we trust you to make good decisions because you've been trustworthy and consistent over time. And that was me just drawing on the collective wisdom of the group. We had lots of team-based meetings where it was, gosh, I don't know exactly what let's put our best thinking together based upon the most recent information we have to come up with the most informed decision.
Well, and I think there is also, to that point, Damian, a little bit of a experience coming to play. Like you were able to maneuver through this situation because you've had experience as a leader for multiple years. I couldn't imagine what that would feel like as a new leader and the isolation that would come from it as you're trying to bear this responsibility as somebody who might be going through it for the very first time.
Yeah, well, that's, in the backwash, right, of COVID, there's been a lot of early retirements, resignations, unfortunately, firings, right, of some superintendent leaders. And, the consequence of that is that the current superintendent, at least in the state of Wisconsin, there's 420 superintendents in the state of Wisconsin. The average tenure is somewhere around 3 years. Now, if you think about, I don't care if you're public, private, nonprofit, any leader with, a few years of experience or less, there's just no substitute for having that experience. And, Michael Fullen used to talk about the change process really being 4 to 7 years, right, for deep, lasting, sustainable change. So I think the challenge right now for public education, which finds itself at a crossroads, is that nationally we know the average superintendent is somewhere around 2.6 years. And how do you affect meaningful, deep, sustainable change when you've got a rotating carousel of either board members or superintendents? And, that's my story too. I mean, I was the 5th superintendent in 6 years back in 2005, and I just had the good fortune of a lot of things going right over the course of 19 years to be able to finish my career in the same district I started in. But that's not the reality for most school systems.
And I think you segued really beautifully into identifying a key problem that has connections to some of this leadership loneliness, that stat, the 2.6 years of average tenancy for superintendents. So, do you see a connection to why leadership loneliness is becoming more prevalent in recent years to the consistent turnover? I'm just really curious as to, from your vantage point, why we're seeing this grow so much, especially in our education, this leadership loneliness.
Yeah, I think one of the new coins of the realm, at least for superintendent leaders, is how do you translate content into context, right? Or sense making. And that's what we're really charged to do as leaders. And so one of the things, and you and I talked about this before the podcast, just readers are leaders, right? And just trying to get a view of the landscape through doing a lot of reading. And I came across the USA Today article December 23rd of last year, and the title of the article, Jordan, is "Americans Are Lonely and It's Killing Them." And there's lots of reasons for your question about why leadership loneliness has become more prevalent. In fact, Dr. Murthy, Surgeon General, indicates that loneliness in leadership has doubled, or loneliness in America, I think more generally, has doubled since the 1980s. And he likens it to the negative health effect of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, if you can believe that. We also know that loneliness is a trigger for anxiety, depression, heart disease, and suicide. So it's a causal factor for some other really tragic health-related conditions. But the article highlights a number of things that we don't have time to get into. One, though, that I want to underscore for the purpose of the podcast is its reference to social media. It says that social media has accelerated loneliness as research shows feeling lonely is more common among heavy users of these sites. Although likes and followers may make a person feel good at the moment, they don't foster a genuine connectedness with other people, Murthy said. A Harvard study found that 43% of young adults reported increases in loneliness since the outbreak of the pandemic. About half reported that no one in the past few weeks had taken more than just a few minutes to ask how they were doing in a way that made them feel like the person genuinely cared. So similarly, in his book, Strength to Strength, best-selling author Arthur Brooks refers to these as real friends versus deal friends. One of his kids convicted them on that. They said, "Dad, you've got a lot of deal friends, but you don't seem to have a lot of real friends." And so I wonder how prevalent that is within the circles of administrative leadership. So that would be, really my first response to that question. It seems like an easy out, but I think I would challenge us all to reflect on our own exposure to social media and the way we feel when we're done, spending time, doom scrolling or whatever we do. So a litany of other things I could get into. If you think about kind of where we find ourselves on the doorstep of 2025, it wasn't that long ago. You go back to 2005, mobile tech, smartphones, and the rise of social media. Somewhere shortly after 2005, you've got Facebook, YouTube, and the iPhone in 2007. Not that long ago. And I think all of this got exacerbated during the pandemic because of the isolation that was associated from at-home learning, which just isn't the equivalent to face-to-face. As good as this is, Jordan, when you and I were at that conference this summer talking, that was, uniquely different than what we're doing now. So I'll pause there.
I just think it gives us a lot of merit to say we have to bring the Growth Over Grades podcast onto the road and start doing these things in person. But no, I think, you're hitting on a bunch of really critical factors here. And I think just from my own personal, my personal reflection on what you mentioned about social media and the need for actual human connection, to tell a story about it, how often do you wake up in the morning? What's the first thing that you do? Grab your phone.
Yeah.
And, it's really easy. And I could think of 5 times in the past 2 weeks where I, wake up, grab my phone with the best intention of saying, I'm going to turn my alarm off, get out of bed, and I'm going to go for a walk or go to the gym or hit something off of my to-do list. And then you see that one social media notification. I think, okay, I'm just going to check this out. And then next thing I know, 20 minutes has gone by. I've missed my window to go to the gym. And what's the emotion that I feel? I don't feel good. I feel shame because I didn't do what I set out to accomplish. And, that's me recognizing it, discussing it, owning up to it. But I feel like there's also something to be said about the individuals who feel those things, but they're not recognizing it or owning up to it or trying to say, I'm going to be better tomorrow about it. And, this is coming from somebody who is not a young adult, whose brain is still developing, right? Mm-hmm. So like as a leader, you're not setting yourself up for a successful, meaningful day if that's the first emotion that you're encountering. But if you're also a young adult whose brain is still developing and trying to then go into school feeling those same things, I feel like there's something wrong or there's something missing with how this is impacting us day to day.
Yeah, I think intuitively we know that something is wrong, and I'm a proponent and a fan of technology, and we were one of the first one-to-one districts in Northeast Wisconsin, back in 2010, 2011, so a long time ago. And yet there needs to be a balance there between enough and too much. And one of my favorite authors is a futurist named Richard Swenson. He wrote a book called Margin. You see the cover of the book here and the image that he chose to use, which says time expired. The subtitle reads, Restoring Emotional, Physical, Financial, and Time Reserves to Overloaded Lives. But one of the things he talks about, and this is a quote from Swenson, he says, technology has made it possible for us to do more and more, faster and faster, but it has not made it possible for us to do what is truly important. And just on the blurb on the back from the desk of Swenson, a medical doctor, he says, overload is not having time to finish the book you're reading on stress. Margin is having time to read it twice. Overload is fatigue. Margin is energy. Overload is red ink. Margin is black ink. Overload is hurry. Margin is calm. Overload is anxiety. Margin is security. Overload is the disease of our time. Margin is the cure. We're just coming on the heels of the national and state political elections last night. And the most interesting commercial I saw was from the company Calm, 30 seconds of silence. They bought significant airtime last night to communicate a message to a very broad and diverse audience that we need, I guess, ironically, using a tech tool, right, to help us achieve a greater state of calmness in our lives. But, Swenson was way ahead of his time. And, it's the old adage that, our greatest asset can become our biggest liability if we don't have the self-awareness to self-monitor and self-regulate. And those are higher level executive skills that we want our kids to learn. And yet we know that until the early to mid 20s, they don't really totally have the capacity to do that because of what we know about the growth of their brains up through the mid 20s.
Just thinking about that, how to leverage technology. Obviously, technology is becoming so prevalent everywhere. But I'm seeing a lot of really interesting trends happening where people are away from technology or they're using new technology that's designed like old technology. I'm not sure if you've seen the trend around the light phone that has recently come out. And,
right.
It's so interesting to me because I see it and I go, well, it just makes sense. Like, sure, if you have, an addiction to social media or can't have that self-regulation, this device is going to help you do that. But I just find it really funny that the solution to too much technology is just a different piece of technology. Whereas why are we not able to just teach better self-regulation skills or teach people how to maintain a balance and do that? Why is the solution just a different piece of technology?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I would often repeat to my leadership team, and one of your jobs as superintendent is to become the chief reminding officer and to be intentionally redundant, almost to a fault. In fact, one of my assistant superintendents upon my rewirement gave me a gift of several candles, and each one of the candles has a favorite expression that I would say over time. So he was paying attention and created these custom-made candles to honor me in the process. But to your point, the statement I would make to my team, Jordan, was that reflection turns experience into insight. And that's a powerful quote when you think about the meaning of it. And yet, so often we have such a dynamic and fast-paced life that we don't take the time to pause and to stop and to reflect, because we're moving on to the next thing because we've got deadlines to meet and projects to complete. And yet it's kind of like, if you take a jar of river water and you fill it up and you get all that sediment and stuff floating around in there, the only way to get clarity and to let the particulates within the water settle down is to put it on the shelf, let it set. So one of the big strategies that I employ that I probably got the most positive feedback on when it came to loneliness and leadership, and it seems like a contradiction, but once a day during the school year, I would give my leadership team a paid day off to go to a retreat center in Green Bay on the campus of St. Norbert College. And they got a room with a bed and a cot and a chair and a desk. They got access to a 250-acre campus. They got a lunch included with it. And the only requirement of the day, Jordan, was you have to unplug from technology. I said, I don't care if you sleep. I don't care if you leisure read. I don't care if you walk. I don't care if you journal or pray or whatever you choose to do. That's up to you. And out of all the things I did over the course of, almost 20-year career as a superintendent, that's the thing I got the most positive feedback on from my team, because the team instinctively knew that it was precious, right? And it caused them to reflect on their experiences and to gain greater insights. And I would typically do it this time of the year, November, December, as we're moving toward a new year. I want you to take this time and space to reflect on where you've been, take stock of where you're at in order to prepare for what's coming in the future. And the other thing I was strategic in doing is making sure there was no more than two administrative colleagues there at one time. And the only thing they could do is have lunch together. And some of them connected over lunch and told me how powerful that was, that they could break bread together, typically with people they didn't associate with that much. Right. I had a leadership team of about 35 that took advantage of this. So that's the flip side of being lonely. There's a positive and a negative element to the emotion of loneliness. And, emotions are messengers, right? Mr. Rogers told us that we need to become emotional archaeologists and dig down to try to understand what the emotions are telling us. The negative or the dark side of loneliness is that it causes us to withdraw and isolate, especially when we've tried reaching out and feel like we've been rejected. And you heard that in the superintendent testimonial I shared a few minutes ago. Right. The positive or the gold side of being lonely is that it causes you to yearn for connection and solitude. And actually in solitude, you can have some concentrated time to really take stock of what matters most. And I think most people, when they do that, they get clarity on, hey, relationships and social connections matter most. I need to get back to that because I've been pulled away from that through the busyness of life. And that's what the day of solitude did for that leadership team. And when I would have people retire or leave at the end of the year, I would always give them a platform at the end of the year meeting just to share whatever they wanted with our team. And two of the most powerful testimonials, again, were two individuals who were both going on for promotions elsewhere, who just said that experience was really exceptional for them in terms of creating a better quality work experience for them as professionals and as individual people.
I think there's a lot to unpack in the opportunity to kind of pause, almost like having that forced pause to just slow down a little bit. Yeah. I feel like it is really easy to let life get ahead of you. There's always something to do and everybody is so busy, and having the opportunity to be forceful to pause, like you mentioned, to reflect. And I feel like there's an underlying theme from the past 35 minutes of our conversation of that need to reflect. Yeah. And you've mentioned, journaling and having that chance to journal each day. And I feel like that's a strategy that is often discussed, but really difficult to put into habit. Yeah. To do it once a day, give yourself that time once a day, carve out that minute once a day. And I've spoken to a lot of leaders who say, the journaling is great. But I've also talked to a lot of leaders who say, I went in with the intentions, but then I didn't know what to write. What do I talk about? Mm-hmm. And then they start looking at prompts, or give me an app that's going to ask me 3 questions every day. And it's like, you're getting yourself away from the purposeful activity by overthinking it and just doing the exercise. And I'm just kind of curious about, when you provided this for your team, was there guidelines, or did you say, go and just be you for a day?
Yeah, both and I would begin by saying Warren Buffett, 90 years old plus, a billionaire, right? Says if he's not staring out the window 90 minutes a day, he's not doing his job. Well, and I know people might respond to that by thinking, well, that's great for him. He's a billionaire. day. Similarly, Netflix has a great 3-part series. I think the title is Getting Inside Bill's Brain or Decoding Bill's Brain. It's about Bill Gates. Once a year, he goes off to a remote location with his bag of books, his journal, and his case of Diet Coke. And he spends the week reading, reflecting, journaling, and that's an incubator for some of his best ideas. And the video, which I highly recommend, and you don't have to be an educator, it doesn't matter if you're an educator or not. It's a great leadership video around what one of the best thinkers, arguably in the history of the world, 20th, 21st century, how he stays fresh and current. And some of the innovations he's working on are like, wow, it'll blow you away. I showed it to my leadership team because that's the type of innovative thinking that we need and want in the K-12 space. And then another resource I'd recommend is Ruth Haley Barton wrote a book called Invitation to Retreat. She talks, Jordan, about the critical importance of strategic withdrawal, which is a military term. Sometimes it makes sense to pull back, to consolidate your gains, to process. And she has a whole framework for questions she asked during a retreat. I went to Alaska. My brother was up in Anchorage several summers ago. He invited me up, and I took that book with me as we were on 2 mini hikes and just had the solitude and the silence and the stillness to really kind of I sat at a lake for 3 days, and it was definitely silent. The only thing I saw for 3 days was a beaver swimming back and forth. And the message was like, be the beaver. The beaver's not trying to be someone.
Right.
It's not. It's like, just be yourself. But having the framework by Ruth Haley Barton was helpful. So to specifically answer your question, one of our required reads was John Gordon's Life Word. He also has an accompanying version of this called One Word. And the big idea is within 45 minutes, you can read this book. And in the case of Life Word, it gives you a word specific to the legacy that you want to leave as a person. The One Word version of this talks about having a theme for the year, a one-word theme for the year. So what I asked them to do on one occasion was to take that book with them and come up with their word for the next year. And later that spring, I was on the phone with one of my principals who was having a really difficult situation with a family that had a student who qualified for special education services. And this principal had done everything he could to try to support both the student and the family, but it just wasn't working. And the family asked for the student to be transferred to another elementary school in the district. And I could tell how much it bothered this principal. And in the moment, I paused, and what came to mind for me was to ask this principal what his one word was for the year. And in the moment, I could tell on the other side of the phone that it was kind of an epiphany. He paused, Jordan, and he said, my one word for the year is release. And in the moment, he knew that he needed to release control or the attempted control of the situation, to others who were trying to support him. And it ended well. We got the student in a different placement, and we're able to address the student's needs. But I mean, that's the power of having, in this case, one word that can really, give you, if your why is big enough, right? Simon Sinek talks about that, begin with why. So often we want to start with what or how, and we don't know our why, and we end up, chasing after 100 good things at the expense of the best thing in the process. So that's one of the conditions I would have. And we did a lot of behavioral science work too, so I would ask them to read their behavioral science reports. And our mantra was know your style, own your style, and leverage your style. And but again, that takes some concentrated time to reflect on who am I as a leader, what is my style of leadership, and how do I best deploy it for maximum influence and impact. And that was a big part of what I encouraged them to do during that time as well.
As we're kind of discussing some of these strategies, just to summarize what we've heard up to this point, I think the idea of pausing, reflecting, granting yourself time to reflect is a big strategy that we've talked about that you've had really positive outcomes. Is it fair for me to say, this idea of the one word a year kind of comes from this book, a book study, or more of like a required reading where you allow your team to kind of focus in on your why and set themselves up for success? I'm curious from your side, Damian, if there's other strategies that you suggest through consulting or have employed through experience to help combat some of this leadership loneliness or feelings of isolation?
Yeah, there's a few, Jordan, that I can reference here today. And I think what quite often came out of those reflective experiences was a reminder and a recognition that family, first, last, and always. And so often I feel like we pay lip service to that within the profession, but we don't do a really good job of giving it hands and feet. So I would always tell my team, you're expendable at work, but you're not expendable at home as a husband, as a wife, as a dad, as a mom. So in fact, there's a book titled Regrets of the Dying, and that's the number one regret that people who have terminal illness cite is spending too much time at work. And I'm a recovering, workaholic. So I never quite mastered that. And, I joke that I'm writing a book titled Lessons I've Learned from the Mistakes I've Made. It would be a thick book, but if others can benefit from that, so be it. But I think family first, and not just saying it, but, we talked a lot on my leadership team about using the power of the calendar, because you can either schedule your priorities or you'll end up prioritizing your schedule. It's a little bit of a play on words, but my mentor, Tom Joint, used to talk about, he was a superintendent in a few big districts and then taught at UW Milwaukee. He would talk about blocking out chunks of time on your calendar. And then when someone wanted you to attend a meeting or go to an event, these were chunks that were devoted to family. He had, 4 sons and a great wife that I worked with as one of my library media specialists. But what you would say in response to the potential conflict is, I'm sorry, I've got a commitment during that day and that time. Can we look at another day and time? So it really is as simple as having boundaries and using your calendar to establish those boundaries. And you don't need to explain or justify why you can't go to every event and every meeting and every professional learning experience. You've got commitments. So I had a calendar both in my office and I have it here at home. It's a year at a glance calendar. And my wife and I would sit down in January and identify, what are the chunks of time that we're going to block out for each other, one-on-one, having a date night once a month for our family. Got 4 kids, all of them in their 20s now. And, how do we do more than just pay lip service to them? If you don't, at least for me, if I didn't take a more of a calendar-based approach, I would have, just been at the whim of whatever came my way. So I would say that's first. The second thing would be having a mentor network or a peer group to hold yourself accountable. And the question I always ask, Jordan, is excluding family members the next time you're in crisis, not if you're in crisis, but the next time you're in crisis, who are you going to call at midnight? And most leaders have a difficult time coming up with 1 or 2 names. And so I would challenge them to think about that. I think the harder and related question to ask is, who would call you at midnight? Who have you endeared yourself to or invested in so much so that even though it's midnight, they can pick the phone up and say, hey, Jordan, I know it's midnight, man, but I need you. Here's my situation. Can you help me? And so in the absence of that, loneliness really gets magnified, right? If you don't feel like you've got 1 or 2 go-to people that you can trust. So cultivating those friendships, those deep, trusting friendships, that network of support, having accountability partners who are going to push on you, tell you what you don't want to hear. That's a challenge too, right? To have that level of relational trust. Then I think practicing vulnerability, which I think is one of the new coins of the leadership realm, by being okay with sharing your challenges with your team in an appropriate way. I'm reading Brene Brown's book right now, Atlas of the Heart, and she talks about the fact that the average American can only identify 3 emotions. anger, happiness, and sadness. And of the three, anger has become the most socially acceptable. And yet to lead at a high level, we need to have an awareness and the agency and capacity to identify and respond to somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 plus emotions or thoughts. And that's the reason why the movie Inside Out is so popular right now, right? If you haven't seen it, go see it. I mean, and who do you resonate with in the movie, right? So having that EQ is, obviously even more important than having the IQ. And the thing we've talked about is self-reflection, but I would add to that self-care, Jordan, and whether that's, exercise or walking or eating well or getting enough sleep. I'm running into so many leaders who are so sleep deprived, and is it any wonder, right, that they're not optimizing their influence and impact as leaders? So it's basic blocking and tackling. In Green Bay, when Vince Lombardi first came as a coach back in the early 60s, in his first team meeting, Jordan, he walked in and he held up this object and he said, "Gentlemen, this is a football." As if to say, sometimes the plain things are the main things: sleep, diet, exercise, having a friend. I think it's easy to lose sight of the basics sometimes, and just coming back around to that is maybe a good thing to consider as we move toward a new year where there's going to be lots of challenges to do otherwise.
I think to unpack a few of these things, Damian, what really is highlighting to me is, as you're talking about those stories, it made me just think about an experience that I held recently, where, call it a year ago, I was feeling very lost in my own personal career. I've been doing this role for 7 years at this stage, and I felt like I was on a pathway to burnout in a really quick way. And I was at an event and I was talking with the superintendent who was just getting into executive coaching and consulting. And he said, "You know what? I think you would really benefit from just having a conversation outside of your work." And I thought, okay, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to have the conversation. And when we started diving into it, it really came from an empathetic place where he said, "Hey, I see somebody who's struggling. Let's have a conversation." I've now been meeting with him bi-weekly for the past year as a mentor. So when I'm thinking about some of the strategies you are discussing, that was the first place, finding a connection, starting to have that conversation with someone that's completely aside from your day to day. But as we really began to dive into what was it that I wanted, we started making the connections to things like calendar blocking. Hey, you need to give yourself time, because right now what you're doing with your role, it's absorbing all of your time, and you're allowing it to absorb all of your time. And why? We just kept diving into the why. Why do you want to do this? Well, you want to be able to fill your bucket with the hobbies that you are so passionate about, and you're not giving yourself time for it. Okay, so let's reclaim that chunk. What strategies are we going to employ? And then again, diving in, why is that important to you? Well, you want to be better for your family. Well, how do we grant that? And it was such a transformation that I felt in myself in doing this work. And it was challenging. Like, I'm not going to lie and say that it was easy. It was really hard. And there was moments where you faced really hard decisions and really harsh realities. But by working through those challenges over a series of weeks and months, it puts yourself into a position where you're able to actually take a step back and go, how did I ever let myself become that person compared to where I am today? So, as I'm just hearing you talk about these strategies, it was almost like the exact framework that I went to come out on the other side a better version of myself.
Yeah, it's a great testimony. And to your credit, you recognized a need for change and you took action on it. And you also recognize that, not that you couldn't have done it alone, but having a thought partner, a coach, right, a mentor, a trainer to push you. I always say that real change is real hard and takes real time. And if anyone suggests otherwise, they're either naive or ignorant or a huckster, right? Any change, whether it's my marriage, whether it's parenting, whether it's becoming a better superintendent, whether it's my physical fitness, it's hard, it's time consuming, and generally speaking will benefit from the support, the coaching, the training, the accountability of someone else. So, I think at the first part of when you began to describe that, I think we can, break our careers down into three phases. 20 to 35-ish. I think the question is, can I do this, right? Early 30s to early to mid 40s. The question is, can I sustain this? That's what I heard you saying without using those words. And then in the last third of our career, I think the question is, can I finish this? And regardless of what stage you're in, we'll all benefit from a coach or a mentor. And why do we know intuitively that that's true in the sports world, and I think even more so in the business world? But in the educational space, it seems like that's a luxury, not a necessity. And I would say it's a necessity. And I went to my chiropractor's office recently, and it's right down the street from where I used to be superintendent. And the receptionist said, "Well, what are you doing now, Damian?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing executive coaching and team development." And the person was quizzical and said, "Well, what does that mean?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of like going to the chiropractor. I come in here because I need support and assistance, and there's certain things that only my doctor, my chiropractor, little adjustments that only he can make that make the difference for me, and they don't take it away entirely. And so I keep coming back once a month on average just for a little fine tuning." And that's all a coach really does, right? They see elements or aspects of your style, your approach, your leadership, and they know how to apply gentle pressure to affect relief or gain or progress. And coaching is the same way. There's a great TED Talk. It's a surgeon who said the title of the TED Talk, and excuse me for forgetting the name of the surgeon, but the title is "Why Everyone Needs a Coach." And it's a surgeon got to a certain point in his career where someone suggested the need for a coach, and he was oppositional to the idea. And then when he tried it, there were so many things that he couldn't see about himself, little things that made a big difference. And that's the benefit of having a coach, asking the right question at the right time, and kind of guiding you to arrive at your own answers without telling you what to do. That's transformational coaching, right? Elena Aguilar talks about that in her book, The Art of Coaching, right? There's, directive coaching, there's facilitative coaching, and then there's transformational coaching. The transformational coach comes alongside you and recognizes that real change is real hard and takes real time, and it's always an inside-out process, right? And their job is to kind of be a guide on the side, like good teachers and good principals and good superintendents, and to really help you see things that you couldn't otherwise see on your own. So kudos to you. Thanks for sharing that.
A lot of what you were discussing about the transformational coaching, I feel, is a really firm connection to education, especially how we're seeing the world of education change from our teachers being the facilitator or the owner of the information to now just facilitating the learning journey and how they're going to guide those students along the pathway, especially with technology and information being at their fingertips. Our role as teachers needs to shift. And I do feel a lot of benefit for districts bringing this transformational approach into their professional development. We need to be teaching teachers how to do this work.
Yeah, when I would, just the insight that I gleaned from your comment earlier is that some of the best coaches or teachers are music teachers and coaches, right? Because they do exactly what we were just describing in terms of feedback, right? Continuous, ongoing, small. Cumulatively, it makes a big difference. So,
Damian, as we're sort of wrapping up our conversation here today, what advice would you give to emerging leaders about, finding and maintaining a sense of purpose in their day-to-day roles so that they could try to prevent these feelings of isolation or loneliness?
Yeah, be true to yourself is always a good place to start. Like, what is your identity? Who are you as a leader? And in one of my schools, or actually a couple of the schools here where I used to be superintendent, when you walk in, you see the mission statements of everyone in the school on the wall relative to why they're there. So if your why is big enough, you can deal with whatever, how or what come your way. And I know that's cliche, but I really believe at the end of the day. That's true. That's going to give you your moral compass. That's going to give you your true north. Anybody can hold the the wheel when the seas are calm. The seas are going to get rough when you're in leadership, and you better know your true north, so to speak, as a leader, and that's going to sustain you. Borrowing some of Covey's language, right, and which is still timeless and really good. I love his illustration where you've got your circle of control, right? You have your circle of influence, which is broader, and then you've got your circle of acceptance or concern. And to the degree or extent you focus on your circle of control, you'll shrink that circle of acceptance or concern, and you'll enlarge your circle of influence. So really, there's not a whole lot that we control if we're honest with ourselves, but I control my attitude, my effort, and my focus. Those are three big things over which only I have control. And if I'm concentrating my focus, my time, and my energy on what I can, focus on relative to attitude, effort, and influence, I'm going to expand that next circle and shrink that circle of concern. So I think so often we get weighed down as leaders with that circle of concern or the circle of acceptance, and whether that's what's happening at the state level with education and the budget or any number of other things. And not that they're not important, but just understand, with limited time and energy and resources, how can you best deploy those for maximum benefit? And, that's really a challenge, and it's really an opportunity, I think, for leaders today. And talked about this, mentorship and collaboration. And I would say, who are the leaders that you want to become like? Find someone. And I'll close with a story. Jordan, I've had the opportunity to go to Angola Penitentiary, which is the nation's largest maximum security prison, 6,000 inmates, an hour north of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on a former slave plantation. It's 18,000 square acres in a swamp, and been invited there to observe and to do leadership development in a situation that was once referred to as America's deadliest prison, with 40 inmates killed there in 1 year, and it was known as the Alcatraz of the South, until one person went there, a warden named Burl Cain. He didn't want to go there. Nobody wanted the job to go to Angola Penitentiary, and basically his mother, a leader in his life, said, yeah, you're going to go there, and you're going to make a difference for those inmates. And reluctantly, Burl Cain went to Angola Penitentiary, the Alcatraz of the South, and began to institutionalize change. He got to know the prisoners on a first-name basis. He gave everyone a job. He created a vocational educational program. He created a Masters of Divinity program where over 200 of them were able to get their MDivs. He created a radio station and a newspaper station within the prison. Now remember, 2/3 of these men, 6,000 of them, are there on a life sentence without parole. They're never getting out of Angola. He's created all of these opportunities for purpose and meaning and significance. And at the end of the day, Jordan, I don't care if you're a prisoner in Angola or you're a superintendent outside the walls of the prison. We all have the same basic needs. We all want to be seen. We all want to be known, and we all want to be loved. And that was true. As I talked to dozens of those prisoners, there was such a sense of freedom within the walls of that prison because the warden had taken on the responsibility to transform the culture. And the reason I share that story is I think so often listeners who are listening to this might have the attitude, well, yeah, Damian, that's cool. That's good for you, but you don't understand my community. You don't understand my board. You don't understand my staff. You don't understand, my team. And the honest answer is I don't need to understand that because I've seen what's possible when real leaders lead from the heart, on purpose, in the most adverse conditions, born out of love and a genuine desire to make a difference. And isn't that common denominator for all of us as educational leaders? So if Burl Cain can change Angola State Penitentiary, and you can Google it and watch the story, gosh, we can change public education for the better. And I'm not likening, don't mistake what I'm saying here. I'm not comparing, our school systems to prisons, but I've seen the extreme on one end of the continuum. And, despite our challenges within the public education space, man, we can do it here too. And we're doing it here. I've seen, East Coast to West Coast, Texas to Northern Wisconsin and everywhere in between. I've toured many, many schools through some national affiliations, and I've seen great evidence of incredible things happening. And how can we bring those to scale in an environment where I think loneliness is more prevalent than ever? So I hope a few of the ideas I've given are actionable for the listeners. And I just wish you the very best. It's possible.
So, Damian, as we kind of wrap up, I really appreciate the call out for us to have patience as leaders and to have resilience. And today we've discussed a lot of strategies to lead and to lead more effectively and to give space to reflect on your practice, to bring you into a positive mindset, to have that purpose and lead with your heart. Thank you so much for bringing these strategies to light. Thank you for illuminating a very challenging topic and for bringing it into conversation. I think more people need to be having this discussion. And thank you for sharing all your insights here with our audience. I know they're going to be able to start implementing some of these right away. Thank you so much for the time.
My pleasure. Let's go.
That was former superintendent and now educational consultant, Damian LaCroix. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, and please make sure to hit the follow button on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. Interested in learning more? Comment or email jordan.lewis@spacesedu.com, and we'll make sure to be in touch. I'm Jordan Lewis, and you've been listening to the Growth Over Grades podcast.